Hola chicos! So today is the turn to talk about the novel known as El ingenioso hidalgo Don Quijote de la Mancha, or just Don Quixote, who is the best known novel by Miguel de Cervantes, though he published a few more. Who is Miguel de Cervantes? It's one of the greatest novelists, considered one of the greatest novelists in Spanish literature, and we'll learn a little bit more about his biography in a second. The date of publication for this work is actually two different dates, one for the first one and one for the second one. So we will talk about these two dates later on as well. The genre in which this novel is categorized, it's satirical, but I wouldn't just say this is just a satirical novel, because it's just unique. There's nothing like it. Some of the names that we need to know are, of course, Don Quixote, his squire, Sancho Panza. You have a picture of both of them there. I don't know if you recognize it, but that's Madrid. And behind them, it's the famous Cervantes. Then we have Dulcinea, the lady love of Don Quixote, Rocinante, the horse, and then two of the friends, the barber and the priest, who are Don Quixote's dearest friends, and the Duke and the Duchess. So let's see a little bit of information about Cervantes. He was born in 1547 and he died the 23rd of April 1666, which is curious because apparently Shakespeare died on the same day, the same year. This is also the day where we celebrate Books Day and Literature Day in general. So he was also the son of a poor doctor, which means that he could not have a good education. And his life was quite adventurous since he fought in several religious wars. He was captured by pirates. He spent 5 years as slave. And he held some government jobs collecting taxes because his writing didn't produce enough money and he was just about to give up writing until his novel Don Quixote de la Mancha had so much popularity. You have the two dates of publication, number 1 and number 2, and also some of his key life events are these, which is until 1567, his education in Spain. Then he traveled to Italy, where he learned about some of the Renaissance values, and probably that was his inspiration to complete the novel Don Quixote. Then the more hectic type of life between 1575 1580, with his war life, the Lepanto battle, where he lost one of his hands, where he was a prisoner in Algeria, and then a more quiet type of time from 1580 to 1616, where he lived in Spain, and then he dedicated himself to writing, and it was his most creative period, but also, as what happened with the Baroque time period in general, as you know, it's a period of disillusion. What else do we know about Cervantes? Not much, really. This is a self-description that he wrote in his Novelas Ejemplares. This is in Spanish. We have a translation here. So this man you see here with aquiline face, chestnut hair, smooth and wrinkled brow, joyful eyes and curved, the well-proportioned nose, silvery beard, which not 20 years ago was golden, large moustache, small mouth, teeth neither small nor large, since he has only 6, and those are in poor condition and worse alignment, and so on. And then it finishes with he's commonly called Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. So that's the only description that we have him physically. And that's what everybody uses to, for example, create his portrait. We said that the novel Don Quixote was more than just a satirical novel, and Cervantes introduced quite a few styles in his novel from the Renaissance, from the previous period, like pastoral, the idea of picaresque, chivalry and romance, and pathos. So you can see he introduced each of them in some of his other novels, but all of them in his novel Don Quixote. So his idea was to combine several genres into one, which his initial purpose was to satirize the romances of chivalry, to create a parody of a literary type characterized by the supernatural deeds of valor, how these implausible and complicated adventures, duels, and enchantments were not really believable, but then it became something else and something way more elaborate and important than just that. When it was published, the novel became popular immediately. It was sold for 219 maravedis, which were around $4, which is a lot back then. But recently, a copy was sold as Sotheby's auction at the price of $6 million. It is the most translated work after the Bible, so you can imagine the importance of this work. And let's see how everything started. This is how everything is described. The world of disordered notions flooded his imagination. So basically, it starts with this man who has read so many chivalric tales, and he loses his reason. Okay, so that's the starting point. But again, we will see how that is too simplistic for what's behind this work. Okay, but then at the starting point, one of the key sentences is the opening sentence, which says, en un lugar de la Mancha, de cuyo nombre no quiero acordarme, no hace mucho tiempo que vivía un hidalgo, and so on. Which translated is basically that this story happened somewhere in La Mancha, in a place whose name I do not care to recall or remember, this gentleman who lived there not so long ago, blah, blah, blah. So basically, he's trying to do this novel more relatable for everyone. When Don Quixote gets ready after reading those many novels, he prepares himself for this adventure. What does he gather? Sancho Panza, because he needs squire. Sancho Panza was his neighbor. Rocinante, his worn-out horse, and his lady love, who is actually a poor girl that doesn't really know that Don Quixote exists. And Don Quixote becomes a knight, and to do that, he needs to equip himself also with the language. He always speaks as a real knight, the etiquette for all the knights that they should have, the armor, even though it's not in perfect condition, again, the lady love, his squire, and of course, every important knight needs an important horse with a name. In this case, it's Rocinante, which is basically the sound that the horse does, but it's actually not like an important, strong type of horse, but more like a worn-out type of horse. For the first chapters, we have that Don Quixote originally goes on his own. He arrives to an inn, which he thinks it's a castle. He's badly treated there, and they laugh at him. He doesn't give up. He goes on for some more adventures, but then he's wounded, and it's when he decides to go back home. When he goes back home, he decides to take Sancho with him, and this decision will enrich the novel considerably because Sancho is a person that is complementary to Don Quixote. The story breaks off very soon after Don Quixote has taken off again with Sancho Panza as his squire, and it's all starting with the windmill encounter. After this windmill story, the rest of the chapters normally goes with Don Quixote facing repeated misadventures, and he's normally courting disaster. At some point, Don Quixote is fooled by his friends and goes back home. And that's the end of the first part. The second part is the second part of the book. It's the third and last trip, which takes place in Barcelona. Don Quixote leaves towards Barcelona and he meets the Duke and the Duchess there, who are two of the most important characters for this part. They are not very nice people, but they are at some point they are embarrassed by their attitudes because they can see that what they thought was something stupid, for example, something that Don Quixote said or Sancho said, but in the end they are seen as the fool ones. At the end of this part, Don Quixote is challenged by a fake knight and he's forced to go back home. Then he recovers reason and dies shortly afterwards, unfortunately. Okay, so you have the beginning and the end, which are kind of opposed because it's all like lively and then it's all very somber and sad. But let's talk about what makes this novel so unique. One of the first things is the identification of the hero with craziness. Apparently Don Quixote is crazy. But is he really crazy? We'll talk about that. Also, the personality of Don Quixote and his individualism, in the sense that he doesn't do whatever he's supposed to be doing, but he does whatever he thinks he should be doing. The novel also makes fun of the typical features of the knights and their deeds, so repeated during the Renaissance time period. The combination and how reality and fiction are intertwined. And then it's a novel that it's written to fight against the disillusion of the Baroque time period. This novel is also so unique and so intricate because of its literary techniques, also quite advanced. For example, the narrator. It's a very complex type of narrator. Why? Because originally he seems to find a manuscript. Then from that manuscript, he will continue writing the rest of the story. Then we have an omniscient narrator, a narrator that knows everything that's going on, but then we find also a narrator who forgets, who doubts, who is confused. So it is almost as if we were the narrator, because we don't really know what's going to happen sometimes, but then at the same time we know everything that's happening. It is as if we were writing our own story. The use of dialogues, again, are important, as were, for example, in the work La Celestina, because characters are described by what they say. Because of that, there are different levels of speech: educated, common, vulgar. Then another important literary technique is the use of counterpoint, which is the simultaneous development of different actions in the same story. The use of intertextuality, which is the reference to other type of literary text in the story, also known as meta-literature. And of course, key to this story, the use of humor. how jokes and vulgar expressions are key to some of the scenes, and for example, how they make fun of clothing and situations and characters. About the themes and symbols, one of the main ones would be the idea of disillusion, how everything was going so bad in Spain, and how they portray this horrible situation in this work. Then the idea of chivalry and romance, the different systems of morality, how everything is organized in Don Quixote's imaginary world. The very important distinction between class and worth. Having money doesn't mean that you are worth more than any other person. The idea of honor and romance, literature and books, and the importance of literature and books in our lives. The importance of horses, and the importance of making your own decisions. We are going to talk about all of these in the different fragments that we are going to comment on. Number 8, which is the one with the windmills. Number 18, which is another adventure with Don Quixote fighting a herd of sheep. And then the last one where Don Quixote fell sick and how he died. About this, I have a question for you on Ciel and Virtue. In the end, the hero Don Quixote returns to La Mancha, and only at his deathbed, a few seconds before he dies, he confesses the folly of his past adventures. So why this change of opinion? What do you think? This novel has been so important that its impact is just worldwide. Its literary impact, to start with, it's considered the first modern novel and the most influential work ever written in Spanish. Many books after this one were based on this novel, and we have plays and operas based in this story, like The Man of La Mancha. We also have references in modern language, like ser un Quijote, to be quixotic, which means to be idealistic, but also pursue your dreams no matter what. And a phrase like tilting at windmills, luchar contra molinos de viento. We also have references in art. The one on the left is by Picasso, the one on the right is by Dali, and many other examples. You have like comic books and stamps and t-shirts and TV shows. Everything is connected, has been connected to Don Quixote at some time. We even have Don Quixote in Spanglish. I don't know if you understand. This is the first paragraph in the Don Quixote novel. And even in television. I don't know if you recognize this one. This is from The Walking Dead. And more recently, we have this TV show, I don't know if you know it, it's called The Expanse. And they decided to call their work, their spaceship, Rocinante. And the last one would be La Casa de Papel on season 4. There is a reference in one of the first couple of chapters to Don Quixote as well. Well, just wrapping up, Don Quixote is a reflection of reality, represents the Baroque chiaroscuro, and we will talk about some conclusions as well. So let's start with the reflection of society, where we can see the different classes and how they interact with themselves, different jobs that many of the characters have, and how, again, are represented in the novel. And we will also be able to see, if you read the novel, how people have different ways of doing things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are wrong or right. They are just different. About the Baroque chiaroscuro, the idea that Don Quixote and Sancho are complementary and not really opposed type of figures, the idea of exaggeration and excess and everything being crazy, in contrast to the balance of the Renaissance, how man now is more self-confident and enthusiastic about basically anything, the duality in the story and the characters, the idea of Don Quixote, who is at the same time foolish but also wise, and again the use of counterpoint. So, summing up, it's just a complaint about the time he was living in, which was obnoxious and cruel and vicious. How this is a representation of a real but also a personal trip. How the hero is again the down-to-earth type of hero, the anti-hero, and how all these things we have been discussing so far are connected to the concept of reality. Bueno, chicos, that's all for me, and thank you very much.